Hello, my name is Thomas Buell, and in today's video, I'm going to be showing how to hack into another computer system using a password cracker called THC Hydra. We're going to brute force an attack, and then once we get onto that system, we're going to retrieve a document from it or copy it over from the victim machine to the attacking machine. And to start off, this video is solely for educational purposes, and that I am not liable for any damage or harm that may come through this video. Also, this video is through Metropolitan State University. It's through class ICS 484, which is Cyber Operations. There are two teachers for the class, one Professor Joseph Klein, and then the other is Professor Alex Hepp. To begin here, I wanted to show that I have a VirtualBox set up, and VirtualBox is used to set up lab environments. So on the right here is my VirtualBox, and then in the left section here is all the VMs that I have set up on my VirtualBox. And most of these I've set up just to make it seem like I know what I'm doing. But the two that we're going to be using, the first one is the Ubuntu, and it's version 12. And it's version 12, I'm going to get it started here. It's version 12, it's kind of an older version because that's going to be easier for us to hack into. So it's going to be easier to show how to do that with an older version because it doesn't have, it allows you to try many different passwords for the brute force attack. And so I've opened it up here, and as you can see, it's coming on any second. You just have to wait for it to load up. And it might ask me to log in. Nope. Okay. So here is the folder. Here's the home folder. And this is the passwords. It's a document that we're going to try to copy over. So I'm just going to minimize this here. And then the other one that we're going to be using is the Kali Linux attacker. So the Ubuntu was our victim. This will be our attacking machine. And Kali Linux is typically used for that. It's used for penetration testing. And I've set it up over here. It's already open. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to first open up one of our terminals. And then the first command I'm going to run is sudo ifconfig. And what sudo ifconfig does is going to search for the IP address, among other things. And as you can see, here is our IP address. And then over here is the subnet mask. And then that is very important, the subnet mask. What it tells us is that for each of these sections, it's 8 bits. So for each of the 255, it's 8 bits. So 8 plus 8 plus 8 equals 24. And what that tells us is that for the first 24 bits, those are the network's IP. So several of these over here, not every single one, but I've set them up on the same network. And it would be the same as if you were like going to a coffee shop and hook up to the Wi-Fi, you guys would have the same network. And so that's what I've done over here. And so for the first 24 bits, they all have the same network IP address. So 192.168.1 is the same for each of them. And the one that's unique, this last node, is the 14. That's unique to this Kali Linux machine, but all the other ones in the network are going to have a unique one. So then what we're going to do first is we're going to use our nmap tool, and that's a default for all Kali Linux servers. And where I'm going to do a command SP, lowercase s, uppercase p, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to scan it for that IP address, that network IP, and the last one I'm going to put 0 because we're telling the system we don't know what that is. It can be any of them, and we're telling it 24 because it's a 24 bits, letting the system know we're looking for that network, which is the first 24 bits. And so I'm going to click enter. It's going to scan. It's going to pull up several of these IP addresses. So we know that the one on this computer is 14. It ends in 14. And so it pulled up two other ones, one ending in 11, and one ending in 1. Now I already know that the Ubuntu version, it has the IP ending in 11. But in the real world, you'd have to test both of these, see if either of them are vulnerable, maybe both of them are, and then you could test them. And then you would just have to provide that information to whoever you're testing for. But okay, so I know it's the one ending in 11. So I'm just going to run the basic nmap scan for that unique IP address ending in 11. And what this is going to tell us is what ports are open on there, if there's any. Because we're going to need to access the computer through a port. As you can see, it did run through, and it looks like port 22, which is SSH, is open. So then my next step would be to open SSH on my Kali Linux. So to do that, I would have to do sudo apt-get install SSH. And that scan, it just takes a little bit here, or it should. And then once this is done, I'm just going to test to see if it's installed, because sometimes you might have to run a separate command. Okay, so it looks like that's done, but let me run it on this IP address to see, ending 14, I believe, and we're just going to see if it's open. So it's still, that port isn't open, so then we're going to have to do what I call the quadruple S command, and that is sudo service ssh start, and that will hopefully start our SSH port. And that might take a few moments. Okay, so then I'm going to run that same command again and map on that IP address to see if that port is open. Okay, so it looks like that port is open on the SSH. So to rephrase, we have the SSH open on our attacking, SSH open on our victim machines. So now what we need to do is we need to access THC Hydra to then brute force an attack. But how do we do that? So in order to brute force, you have to have a text document, and these text documents will have a bunch of different passwords on them. And what Kali Linux or what THC Hydra will do is it will go through all those passwords to see if there's a match with the login name. So it'll go through all of them. Sometimes the scan can take a while, but it'll go through all of them, and it will try to find a match. If there's not a match, it'll just go to the end of the document. So we need to retrieve that document from here. Each Kali Linux that is the default Kali Linux now has, it's called rocku.txt, and it's available on all the Kali Linux servers. So we just have to locate that. And so first I'm going to change to the super user. So sudo super user. Then I'm going to change to the root ls. And the document can be found on the user folder /share/wordless. So what you can do is you can do user share wordless, enter, and then if I do ls again, it's going to show up. So it's rocku.txt.gz. And so the gz, that's a zip file, but instead of using unzip, which is a common command that you would use to unzip a file, we have to use gunzip because it's one of those gz commands. So gunzip rocku.txt.gz. We're going to run that. And then afterwards, we'll look at ls, and you'll see it's changed now. So it's rocku.txt, so it did work. Okay, so now both the SSH ports are open, and we have our rocku.txt. Now we can see, we can run Hydra here, but I'm going to run Hydra help. And it just kind of shows you some of the commands that Hydra has. So here's some like helpful command, or some helpful variables that you can use here. And we're going to be using a few of these here to access that other computer. So first what I'm going to do is do Hydra. Oh wait, real quick, before we do that, I wanted to show, because out in the real world, you have the password list that has all the passwords, and in the real world, you wouldn't know what the login name for the victim machine is. So you'd have to do another one of those documents. So you'd have to have a document that had a bunch of usernames, and then have a separate document that had a bunch of passwords. But for our sake, those scans take so long that I already know the username, so we're just gonna use that. But if you wanted to, what you could do is you could create a user.txt file, and then you would put in all these usernames. You'd do like user, and then you'd enter one in. You can do like admin, but like I said, for our sake, we're just going to do the one, which is user, which is the login name. And I'm going to do Control D. So I just wrote a document. Okay, so we have our user.txt. Now we're ready to use the Hydra. So if I do Hydra L, and you do uppercase L if you're using a text document, which we are in this case, but if you were just using if you knew, you could just do L lowercase L user, but just to show, I'm just going to use the TXT, and then we're going to do uppercase P, and then we have to tell it where to find. So uppercase P is for the password because we're using the text document, and then we need to tell it where to find that text document. So it's rocku.txt, and then I'm going to do T6, so it's going to run 6 tasks at once per second. And then we're going to do SSH, and then it's going to be that IP address that we're attacking here. So there was .11, I think, yeah. Okay, so if you run that, so it's our Hydra command, and then we're going to run it, and we're going to see if it will find any of those passwords, any passwords that are attached to that username or that login name, which is the user. And that might just take a few moments. Okay, so it hasn't finished off yet. Okay, yep, so there it looks like it finished. And it's kind of helpful because all the necessary information that you need to know from this scan is showing up in the light blue. So it's port 22, SSH, the host IP address. Then it tells us the login user. So it was able to identify that as the user. And then the password. It's telling us that the password is password, which that is the correct password. And then so what we can do here is we're going to see if we can log into the system. So we're going to do SSH user, because that's the login name, user at, and we're going to do the IP address for that victim machine. I'm going to type in enter here. It's going to say, are you sure you want to continue connecting? Yes, I am sure. Type in yes. And then this scan can take a few moments too as well. Okay, now it's asking me for the password. So this is the moment of truth. I'm going to enter in password. Type in enter. And it looks like we are on, because it says user at user VirtualBox. But I can confirm here by going ls. And then this looks a lot different than what my Kali Linux server looks like. Okay, so then now we're on here. So we're on here. How do we get this passwords document back to our Kali Linux so we can steal some passwords or look up some passwords here? Okay, so what we have to do first is we have to see what directory we're in. So we can type in the command pwd, which stands for present working directory. And so it looks like we're in the home/user. So then the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run scp, which is secure copy is what it stands for, because we're going to be copying it over to our Kali Linux. Because remember, I'm on the Kali Linux VM, but I'm actually hacked into the Ubuntu computer. Okay, so then we can do home/user/passwords. And then what we can do is okay, so where are we sending it? The next thing is I'm sending it to Tom, because the user for this Kali Linux is Tom at 192.168.1. And I believe the IP address was 14, but we can always confirm by going to the second terminal here. You can do sudo ifconfig to verify what that IP address, because sometimes I forget. Yep, it looks like it's 14. Okay, so 14, and then what we do is where do we want it to send it? So once we've copied it over, we can send it to, I think it's home.tom, because that's my file. That's the directory. So if I click enter, cannot, okay, no such file or directory. Let's try this. Home user passwords. Was that the correct? Tom at home. Is it, okay, 14 home/Tom, is it, maybe let's just try, we'll try home here. Okay, I figured out what I was doing wrong here. It looks like I'm just going to delete, let me pop this open, I'm going to delete this here. You have to put the colon here, and then you can send it. So I'd forgotten, yeah, it's very simple. If you forget one little detail, it won't like it. Okay, so it looks like that command is running through. Are you sure you want to continue connecting? Yes. Password, I have to give the password for my Kali Linux machine. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, looks like it ran through, so ls. Okay, it looks like, oh, we're still on the VirtualBox, but okay, so if I go out here and I click open folder, as you can see, I'm on my Kali Linux, I'm on the Tom, the user, and we have the password set up. So it did successfully transfer over or copy over. And if I click on here, we can look at the passwords here. So it says, ha ha, I tricked you, this document has no passwords. But obviously we're still able to access their system, so we could do some damage, we can mess things up, which is why it's so important to be cautious when you're using public Wi-Fi or even updating your operating systems. So that's the end of this tutorial. First off, I would like to thank Professor Alex Hepp. He was very helpful in a lot of the details and giving tips of how to complete this lab here. I hope this video was educational and informative. Thanks for watching.